let's say, the Croatian side with the Latino side. So he's used to see many cultures at once, right? In school and also in the house. So that's kind of like very spontaneous way to teach my kid that it's natural to have, many friends from wherever they're from and any type of race, right? So it's like it should be natural, right? And that's the way I'm trying to teach him. That's to teach. That's to teach. That's the way. Inspiration as well. Inspiration. Let's say, right? And let's say.
الدعوة in the last 5 or 6 years. So it's been an interesting journey. It's developed in the last 5 or 6 years with the recognition that, okay, and by 5 or 6 years, I mean probably shortly before, in the year or two before Hurricanes Maria and Irma is really when entrepreneurship in Puerto Rico took off. And I would say, so we've got groups like Parallel 18, which is a group that's very much focused on working to attract entrepreneurs from around the globe to Puerto Rico and supporting those entrepreneurs. We've got a very good executive director there who was actually recruited from Startup Chile to come and run our efforts, Sebastian Vidal. And then we've, so we've got that. We've got the Puerto Rican Science Trust, which is actually doing a lot of work on the innovation side of things. We've got Endeavor. Actually, Endeavor Latin America actually had their conference in Puerto Rico this past year. So we've got a very burgeoning ecosystem. I've started calling Puerto Rico Startup Island because every entrepreneur that I've met that comes here doesn't want to leave. And the reason why they don't want to leave is not only because of access to capital and those sorts of things, but it's not only because of its location, the great lifestyle, but it's because of access to investors, access to decision makers. It's an island. It's 35 by 100 square miles, so it doesn't matter if an investor wants to get away from you, they can't.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So we've got a burgeoning entrepreneurial ecosystem. I would say, it can be tighter. It's kind of in that phase where it's taking off, but I would say that it works together better than anywhere that I've seen. I've worked in a lot of different markets. And while it's young and kind of in that it's not necessarily as sophisticated as ideal yet, it works very hard. The different organizations, they call one another, they talk to each other on a regular basis. They have a regular monthly or bi-monthly meeting where all of the heads of the entrepreneurial organizations get together to talk about projects and push things through. So the entrepreneurial ecosystem is robust. Now, as it relates to the education system in Puerto Rico, let's start with from a university perspective. We've got 6 times the concentration of science and engineering graduates that the U.S. has on a year-by-year basis. So you've got very great capacity at a university level. And I will say, as far as the public university, La Universidad de Puerto Rico, it's got world-class programs, and they're at a fraction of the cost of what it would cost to go to a university in the mainland United States. In the mainland U.S., on the low end for a state school, you're probably looking at 15 to 20 grand a year. And for a private school, you can be looking at, 50 to 60 grand a year. Here at University of Puerto Rico, someone can go for 4 years and get out for less than $22,000, $23,000 for all 4 years. So, those sorts of things, world-class education, bilingual context at the university level. And we're finding that a lot of companies recruit heavily out of Puerto Rico because of the caliber of talent that they can get, but also at the price point that they can get it. Now, when you're talking K through 12 education, that's a bit of a different story. You've got varying levels of schools. There are, like anywhere, there are some very good public schools. But for the most part, the public schools in Puerto Rico need to be stronger. But there are a lot of private options, a lot of Catholic options, a lot of other options that are strong and provide,
Okay, interesting. And changing the subject completely to, for example, to create a fund in Puerto Rico, because we have in the Caribbean, you got the Cayman Island, BVI, and tax benefits and etc. Right? Or it's already, I'm not so sure.
Absolutely. I mean, Puerto Rico is a great place to commit a fund to move forward with the fund, because we've got, unbelievable. So as an individual, if one were to choose to live at least 6 months and a day a year in Puerto Rico, they would have 0 federal income tax as an American. If their business, if they're exporting a service outside of Puerto Rico, they would have a 4% personal income tax in Puerto Rico. Then beyond that, from an opportunity zone perspective, opportunity zone, for those who may not be familiar, is federal legislation that really allows for any capital gains to be shielded from taxation over the long term. 95% of the island is an opportunity zone. So that means
Wow.
if someone is investing, whether it's in a business or real estate in the Puerto Rican context, they're able to do it and have their capital gains protected. So there's a lot of incentive and to set up funds in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, makes sense.
Those are huge incentives. I actually wasn't aware that it was such an investment opportunity in pool as well. So that's really interesting. Rod, thank you so much. I think our time is coming to the end for this session, but thank you so much for sharing some insights. And from my understanding, you'll be going over to the breakout room now for some time. So if anyone has any questions, they can direct those over to you as well. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. It was amazing to catch up. It was such a pleasure speaking to you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Likewise. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Roderick. Thank you, Jessica.
So to everyone that is viewing now that does want to go over and ask Rod any questions, you can head over to our breakout rooms. But before you leave, make sure that you do subscribe to Give On Live on YouTube. Okay, so I wasn't expecting it.
Sorry about that. You got cut off. You're back. Oh, Jessica, you're back on live. Mm-hmm.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so we're back on Digecon on live. And Janet, I'd love to turn to you now just before we have our next round of guests coming on and just see what you've been creating. The artwork looks amazing. Is Janet able to hear me? I'm not sure.
Yes. Hi.
Fantastic. Hi, Janet. So we've left you for the last 55 minutes to create some amazing artwork during the conversation that we had with Rod Miller regarding Voices of Diaspora. I'd love for you to share with our viewers just what you've created. It looks remarkable.
Thank you. Yeah, it's about together. I think this season, we have to, especially this time, we need to put it together, everything. The unity, it will be the, best message. Yeah, so like a lion and the lioness. We are in one, yes.
And it looks like the lion is symbolizing courage there as well. It looks really kind of motivational and empowering.
Yes, lion symbolizing the king, the spirit of the king, and boldness, courage, power, and strength.
Fantastic. It looks beautiful. So thank you so much. And just on the topic, while we still have you here, because we're just about to have Danny join us now, who's the former VP from Nike. So we're really excited for that conversation. We had the great talk with Rob regarding his talk on collateral damage, Voices of Diaspora for Breaking Talks. You're based in LA, so I would love just to get your impressions of how you found the past few months. It's been very challenging for a lot of people.
Oh, I cannot hear you. Can you say one more time?
Oh, I think I was just asking how you found the experience over the past few months.
Oh, yes. In the past few months, because coronavirus, I had to stay at home because I always traveling, all over the place for the art, performing art show, something like this. But, this season for me, of course, there's like good thing and bad thing. But I want to focus in good thing. That means I can develop myself more in this season because I have to stay home for safety. So I think the people need more strength and courage, and they are looking for the more chance. And this time is really good to like, how can I say? We are all the same. We are in one. There's no racism. Everybody is equal. So I think this special season we have to learn something, the lesson. That's what I'm thinking. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. So now we are in our second part of the episode 3 for Breaking Talks, Collateral Damage, and we're talking about Voices of the Diaspora. We had a fantastic discussion in our previous segment with Rod Miller, but I'm really excited now for our next guest, and we've just seen that he's joining us now on the chat. So we have Danny. Danny, it's great to have you join us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so sorry. I had a technical difficulty, so I hope you can hear me okay. I'm actually having to do this from the car, so I apologize.
We really appreciate the effort. The sound quality is fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us. Live in the car is the perks that come with live television. So for everyone that is watching us live on YouTube or on our Zoom group call, so Danny is a former VP in brand digital innovation for Nike, among many other things, originally starting out as a graphic designer and having some fantastic achievements and a great career journey to come with it. And now you work on several other freelance projects. And Danny, it's such an important and significant time to have you join us on the conversation. So thank you so much. And I want to start by looking at some of the Medium articles that you've been releasing, and you actually had released one very recently regarding looking at how brands were representing the Black Lives Matter movement and what kind of statements they were putting out there. And I'd love just to get your impression, because you also referenced some of the statements Nike have made, and you gave your impressions of how they've marketed and some of your opinions. I'd love for you to share it with our viewers that maybe haven't seen the article yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity. You know, I think what you guys are doing is a fantastic thing, and I think the world needs it. So thank you for the platform. Yes, I mean, it's been out now, I think 2 or 3 weeks, the Medium article. And honestly, for me, it came from a place of personal experience of what I had experienced myself personally at Nike. And what I was noticing was the ways in which brands, and in this instance, the brand that I worked for many, many years, was approaching this whole Black Lives Matter situation. And at the time, it was right at the heart of, high tension, a lot of frustration, a lot of anger in the air. And I noticed, what was happening in social media and online didn't align with what was going on in the world at large. And so having been, obviously a former VP of brand at Nike, I know very well the process for how things get released into the world. And I helped build it. And so watching, in this instance, Nike sort of release what felt very disingenuous, what felt like a traditional brand campaign for a subject matter that really required, a real serious level of scrutiny with real strategic solutions, it just didn't cut it. You could sort of see between the lines that it felt very much as though, brands looked at this as if it was something that would come and go, like all the other scenarios that had come before it. And for me, and I guess, for the countless of other brand leaders out there, it just didn't feel right any longer when you consider how much brands like Nike rely on Black culture, Black designers, Black athlete, and so on and so forth. I felt as though they could do a hell of a lot more, both in the short term, mid-term, and long term. And so the article was really to try and help educate people about, how brands approach these situations, and sort of what little courage actually is involved in what was perceived as courageous. A lot of the time it's strategic, it's very smart, and most people that sort of don't have an informed look at how marketing works will look at that and go, wow, they're standing for something. I know different. And so it was important for me to put it down on paper and sort of try and help the average consumers better understand how brands tend to approach this thing. And I think, moving forward, as you can see, it's coming out in droves. Every brand now has, need to reprioritize and rethink about how they approach this moving forward, because I think the black dollar will ultimately impact their bottom line. And so I think as challenging a conversation as it has been, I think it's extremely important. I think it's healthy debate. I think it's going to help those that are coming up. My career, I'm done. I'm an old man now, so you can kind of discount me out. But there is a new generation of leaders coming up who are extremely talented. And my role, and certainly what I would like to start being part of, is finding ways to make sure that the career path and their development, there is a legitimate pipeline of growth for upward mobility for people of color. And so that was my motivation to write that piece. And I'm glad that it's had the effect that it's having, because ultimately it was about educating people.
And you raise in the article some fantastic points. And I think if we look at the amount of black squares that were posted on Instagram during that really significant week there was around 6 million. But you're saying that actually large corporations like Nike could do more to create more of a movement. What kind of things would you have liked to see Nike do?
Well, in this case, Nike specifically absolutely should be doing more. Mm-hmm. Nike has built a multi-billion-dollar business off the back of Black culture and Black athletes. That's a fact. I'm not making that up. That's plain as day for everybody to see. So I think the first thing is, I think there's a certain level of arrogance that comes from success that makes it difficult for people to understand what privilege means. So I think there's an internal education that needs to happen around, obviously, race, cultural differences. Those are all sort of soft skills that, quite frankly, should be happening anyway. What I would love to see is a legitimate long-term strategy for making sure that people of color who have earned the right to be in specific positions, from managerial position all the way up to C-suite, have that opportunity, and that there is access, and that there is development, and that there's training, and that there's coaching, and that there is a level of appreciation for this very culture that they're leveraging to make billions of dollars. So for me, it starts internally. Some of the suggestions I put out there in the past, which I think are still highly effective, having some sort of way in which people can report incidences where they face racial discrimination in the workplace, I think is very important. We did that for the women's movement, which I thought was fantastic, because you instantly got a sense of, how bad is this problem within our organization? What's the sort of sense of urgency we need around it? So I think having those things in place where there's a line of communication where people can speak their mind, talk about the things that matter to them without fear of retribution is one. And then the other thing I would really like to see from these brands is your long-term plan. It's no longer good enough to throw, $40 million at a problem and call it a day. That's not what this is. This is a long-term systematic realignment of how we've worked in the past. So I'd love to see a long-term strategy around these things. I would like to see a lot more transparency, accountability, because in the same way that you would launch a World Cup campaign, you would track it. You would know how successful we are as an organization. You would know where to improve because you're analyzing all the data, and you would let the world know how successful you are. Well, apply that same principle to this, because for me, this is more important than a World Cup campaign. And so if your actions don't reflect what I would expect in terms of how seriously you're taking it, then for me as a Black leader, I feel it's important to call out and help them hopefully sort of realign and understand that if you don't adjust yourself as a brand now and start to have a long-term vision for how you solve for this, I genuinely believe that 4 or 5 years from now, a lot of the brands that we see today may not be around, because that Black consumer will stop spending their dollars with those brands. So long story long, it's about looking within. It's about making sure you have representation at every level of the organization, all the way up to the C-suite level, absolutely at the C-suite level, because those decisions have trickle-down effects that can affect those that are coming up. And so those would be sort of, and there's a ton more that we can do, but in the short term, I would certainly love to see those things sort of triggered and activated so that we can start to really solve this problem once and for all, and not have these sort of temporary solutions that gets them over the PR hump, but doesn't really solve the inherent issue of systematic racism.
Mm-hmm. And you've made some excellent points there. And I do want to touch on transparency and personal experience. But just before we do that, you mentioned that kind of these large corporations, these large brands, and potentially their 5-year goals, and actually the fact that they might not have Black consumers in 5 years if they continue this. If we also look at this alliance that we do need to see and this elimination of privilege, we should also see white counterparts also take this stance in 5 years. This shouldn't just be.
Well, so this is a really good one. I love this question. And my response is racism is not a Black problem. It's a white problem in terms of where we're feeling the effects. I actually think one of the things I've noticed recently that I think is a little bit strange is you have the oppressed asking the oppressor to tell them how to solve this problem. So if you are an organization with an all-white C-suite board membership team, and you're asking your internal Black employees to help you see racism, that in itself is an issue. It's not the Black employees that you need to help sort of understand racism. It's your white employees. So I actually would place the problem back. I would flip it the other way and say, how do you get your internal organization to have the right level of empathy and respect, I think, for the culture that feeds the organization? And how do you put into place training that allows for, collaboration, that allows for understanding, that allows for relationships to foster so that the differences can be understood? My personal experience being a Black man with an English accent in the middle of Pacific Northwest, it was very different. I confused everybody, right? And so people that worked under me struggled. They never had a Black boss before. They've certainly never had a Black man from the UK in corporate America as a vice president telling them how they should operate. And so those were real struggles that I had to work through. And in those instances, it didn't feel like racism, but it was absolutely racism, because those individuals were struggling with the fact that I was a Black male leader for them. And it translated and sort of revealed itself in different ways, So I just think that right now, with all the ways in which we're identifying sort of, systematic racism, you sort of start to see it and you realize it permeates everywhere. So you do have to start with those that have lack of understanding. Every Black leader understands both their culture and white culture. They have to, in order to navigate. None of the people that have worked for me have ever had to go and understand what it's like to be an African. There's no value there for them necessarily outside of personal value. So I think there is an internal education that has to happen about Black history, the real history, not the caricature, distorted history, but the truth, the facts. How Black communities ended up being here in the US. How has systematic racism led us to this point? What can we all do better in our day-to-day? How do we stay more conscious of race? How do we make race something we can discuss and not have it be stigmatized or diminished in some way? Because that's always happened in the past. This has to be even this dialogue I love, the fact that we're talking about it, because in discussion comes solutions, and ideas to solve it. So I think there's definitely multiple ways to go. And all of them are important, including the sort of daily things, because the daily things are actually sometimes more dangerous. You've got, from the minute you walk into a working environment to the minute you leave, you're not your true self as a Black leader. You can't be. You're not allowed to be. You're not given the space to be. And I think those are things that we can fix very quickly. In addition to helping, individuals sort of better understand all the various cultures that are out there, that are actually helping their business and their bottom line. I don't think people realize that it's a value add. It doesn't, being a diverse organization is going to affect your bottom line in the right way. You're going to benefit from it. So I think there's a lot of re-education that needs to happen. And I think as people start to see the value and the benefits, which by the way, they already are feeling, but we're just calling them out now more. I think by doing that, we are going to slowly see some positive change in the right direction.
And now to go on to the transparency, because I'm loving how fluid this conversation is, and thank you for being so open.
Sure,
and I really feel like we're getting there. So we do have an open area for questions as well. So I will kind of get to those throughout the conversation if anyone does have any. So if anyone is watching on YouTube or on Zoom, feel free to drop those in. And one of the real concepts that we did have on Give On Live was a safe space for our guests and our speakers and our thought leaders and influencers to be transparent and be able to share their journey and their experience. So maybe if you'd be able just to share some of your experiences that really have stood out for you when you look back, that have been aspects that maybe you've been able to identify that have required significant change, whether it's in corporate America or outside of that in school perhaps.
Well, it's everywhere. I mean, it's I always tell people racism is such an interesting subject now because it's not this blunt object that it used to be. You know, when growing up in the UK, you had the National Front. You knew when you said racism, you immediately think of thugs and, you know, football stands. There was an association here in the US, it's the KKK and all these other right-wing groups. That's the description of racism to this point. I think that's actually been one of the issues, because the real racism, as you're seeing, there's all these caricatures appearing online, the Karens of this world and the Kevins of this world and the Amy Coopers of these worlds. That for me is where it lies. And in terms of experiences, quite frankly, that's everything. I mean, I could tell you, we could be here for weeks if you had the time, sharing these experiences. The sharpest version of that for me has been in corporate America. It has. I didn't experience it as badly in the UK. It was there, but I think there is a certain level of understanding with race in the UK that somehow makes it easier in some ways. I'm not saying it's perfect, far from it. It still has its issues in a real way, but somehow there was an understanding of Black culture a little bit more from people around me and so on and so forth. I didn't feel that here. Here it was really sharp. I've never felt my race till I moved to America.
Wow.
And I'm a bubbly guy. There's always a smile on this face. And so to get to a point where I felt the need to speak up, it would sort of give you a sense of how bad it is, and how pervasive it is. You you start to see that things like depression in the Black community stems from these experiences that we're having. Why? Because people are constantly questioning, people are constantly doubting, people are constantly underassuming or not giving you the benefit of that. You're constantly having to watch your tone. And if I was Italian, being African, we're very expressive with our hands. If I was Italian, they'd be like, oh, he's Italian. That's what they do in Italy. Africans are not given the same space to do that. I have to be twice as behaved. I have to be twice as articulate, if that's a thing. I've been told, oftentimes people say, oh gosh, you sound really articulate. I think that's an interesting statement. Well, what should I sound like? So there's all these like very subtle, they're not blatant racism. There isn't a person that's walking up to you in the workplace and saying, you should be here. It's not that at all. It's this feeling, this constant feeling that the power is really with those leaders, and we're really there to help facilitate and drive their agenda. And I think that's the issue, is they've yet to accept that they can have really strong Black leaders at the highest level of corporate America and still continue to grow and be profitable. And I think that's the narrative that we need to start having and moving towards.
Mm-hmm. So if we talk about your come up journey as well, so Nike seems to be the real flagship of your kind of career, and a particularly interesting journey that you did start out in graphic design and really just amplify based on your work and your creativity. Can you share with our viewers that creative journey and how you came through? Because for a lot of people, this would be hugely inspirational as well.
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, I mean, Nike's the sharpest because it was the most recent. But before coming to Nike, I actually studied as a graphic designer. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, Central St. Martin's by Covent Garden in the UK. That's where I studied. And, I was very fortunate. I was taught by some of the best minds in creativity. So they really helped me understand how to look at the world through a very, creative lens, which really helped me stand out in my early days. So as a graphic designer, I worked at MTV, did a lot of stuff there. Endemol, which did Big Brother, the TV show in Northwest London. And I worked in a number of magazine publications. So I started out really as a traditional graphic designer, and then transitioned into the world of, the web internet when it had just started. And I just fell in love with it. And so I spent the first 10 years before coming to Nike really honing in my craft as a designer. It's interesting that craft translated and shifted really nicely into the brand team that I joined at Nike. But for me, it was always about breaking down barriers at every stage. because as a young Black child, you know, a lot of your inputs are coming from places that maybe you may or may not understand your culture. So there's a lot of self-doubt that's created from those experiences. And I had to prove myself wrong. I had to prove myself wrong at every stage, which was really interesting when you think about the concept, right? And by doing that, I sort of helped myself see that I can do it. And so I've kept that process all the way throughout my career, and it's just helped me go from strength to strength to strength. But design has always been my background. The Nike experience was sort of the sharpest expression of that. I had an amazing time at Nike, like no two ways about that. It's undoubtedly, it's an amazing brand. I had the right budgets, I had the right projects, I had players, I had teams, I had the suite of assets that any marketing leader would sort of hope for. So I was very fortunate. And so I pushed hard to do the best work I could possibly do because I realized it was a chance of a lifetime. And so those design skills translated across really well. And I pushed the innovation because I was naturally passionate about innovation and social media and helping teams build. So all of those things sort of helped me develop my career to this point. But design has always been at the core. Design has always been at the core. And right now, what I'm really passionate about is taking this knowledge and sharing it with other brands. You know, I want to help the head of design or head of marketing at H&M or any brand, right? Rethink and push their work like I will do at Nike, help them be the best marketing mind they can. I also want to help these brands start to translate the Black narrative, both internally and externally, with the level of scrutiny and respect it deserves, and also to help avoid any tone deafness as we start to move into the next phase of where we are. And so my goal now is very much about helping as many brands as possible, become more diverse and celebrate the rich heritage of Black culture that permeates their organization, because it's a positive ad. So it's a weird place I'm in now in terms of, personal career, in that, it's interesting. Corporate America now is knocking on my door saying, "Hey, would you like to come back in?" And I said, "Well, sure, but to help you fix the problem." That's now sort of my goal. But design, marketing. I'm a big fan. I see myself as a bit of a futurist in that I'm excited about the future forward, the future state of where we are as a human race. And so I want to take my skills and my network and all the things that I have at my disposal to help be part of the change moving forward.
And I want to ask on the topic of marketing, because before this interview, I was looking into some of Nike's marketing, and one thing that stood out with me was it was a 2018 campaign with the NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar. So he knelt during the national anthem to protest against police violence. And when these ads were launched, there was a boycott against Nike on social media because they've used this public figure, and stocks and shares fell around 3% on the back of this. But then kind of the repercussion, and it's a really interesting timeline of events that were broadcast, is that then actually after that, companies like shares went up because actually people were purchasing more Nike shoes. So the public forefront on the ground was that actually stock prices went up 30% because sales increased. And I want to get your perception on this. How powerful is marketing during such a dark and clouded time?
I think marketing is powerful, period, at any time. And this is why I think it's important that people respect the process of marketing, because, you're communicating a point of view about, it could be a product, it could be a moment in time, it could be social justice. And so your position is important because people translate that literally. I think in the moment, specifically around Black Lives Matter, I think it's okay for a brand to make a statement if they're planning to live by it. What is not okay is for a brand to make a statement just to be part of the conversation, to be seen to be part of the conversation without true accountability, which is what almost every brand did. Their initial reaction was, "Hey, we need to have a point of view on this." let's make a statement. The reason for me personally why the Nike scenario is so disingenuous is because I was part of the original brief for Colin Kaepernick, and it wasn't what you consumed in the end. It was a completely different campaign. And that campaign was Black Lives Matter specific. Yes, 12 months prior to what you consumers saw, we had a Black Lives Matter campaign on the table that we had pushed for as Black leaders within Nike and said, this is important. We're about sport. We're about humanity. We're about equality. Well, this is a moment where we, as Nike, can show the world that we stand with Colin Kaepernick. We stand with Black Lives Matter. We didn't do anything. We sat on it for 12 months and then took a calculated risk that you consumers translated as, wow, Nike's innovative. No, Nike's calculated, Nike's strategic, Nike's a marketing organization. And so if you take those tools and you apply them in this way, and you don't have a real solution, I think that's bad. I think that's really damaging. I think that's really damaging. And so for me, it was important to speak up because I think all too often brands, tend to, they're forgiven for doing these things. When you blank out your Instagram with a black JPEG while people are in the streets practically dying from protesting, that channel is an outlet for information. You don't go dark. It's the opposite. You use it to expose what's going on around you. And so I had a really allergic reaction to that moment for me. And coupled with everybody saying, wow, Nike's taking a stance. No, Nike wasn't taking a stance. Nike was doing the safest thing ever. Yet we as consumers said, wow, well, if you go back and you look at the work they did, I guarantee you the sign-off is either equality or stop racism. It was never about Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter was first introduced to Nike's vernacular less than 2-3 weeks ago, but nobody knows that. And so those are the things that I think I want consumers to understand. And it sounds as if I'm attacking Nike. I really am not. It just happens to be my first point of reference. I think this is applicable to all brands currently. And I don't think that these brands realize how much scrutiny consumers are having now, how much of an expectation consumers have now of brands. And I think, you're seeing what's happening with Facebook right now, okay? What's happening with Facebook is the same thing. It's the safest thing that any brand can do. Yet again, we're holding them all up. Now, granted, it's for a good, I like the direction, but let's actually think about what these brands are actually doing. They're basically turning off the faucet for their spend. They're saving money. Yet we're saying, wow, look at Unilever. Yeah, you just paused your spend. Now, if you told me you're taking that month's value of media and you're going to apply it to a black cause or some type of cause that's going to help move the needle, then I'm off. Then I'm like, wow, you're doing something. But if your statement is a tax write-off or is a reallocation of budget from one initiative to the other, and you've actually done zero spend, I'm going to call BS on it because I think that brands need to do better. I think that marketing moving forward and brands are going to be the flag bearers of social justice and social consciousness, because clearly politics in itself isn't going to do it. But industries have power. They have a voice, and they tend to use that voice to drive revenue. Great. Well, now let's use that to support the communities that power your business. And I think in return, your revenue will grow. Sorry, I realize I've kind of gone all over the place, but there's a lot of my head.
You've given some fantastic clarity there, and you've really shared a lot of information that I didn't know, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers didn't know as well. I am going to open the discussion now to any of our panelists that have any questions or any attendees. So feel free for them to kind of pop in at any point and ask a question. And in the meantime, so we have a question from Gabriel. So let me read this out for you. It says, hello, Danny. I run an investment banking company in technology. Which tools or ways can I create awareness in helping and supporting communities in an effective way? Thank you, Gabriel Zanko.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, it depends on, I suppose it depends on how you want to help the community. I think there are ways. First off, I'd say what I'm noticing, and I think this is probably very useful for anybody that wants to lean in and actually help solve the problem, is you're starting to get these aggregate sites that show you Black businesses that you can invest in. You're starting to get these aggregate sites that show you, Black businesses in your neighborhood or Black designers, Black employees. The first thing I tell people is if you personally want to do something, I say you mentor somebody. You find somebody who needs mentoring, you mentor them. So that's like right off the bat, super easy thing to do. The second thing I would say is that you want to start making sure that your vendor list supports Black businesses. A lot of the times, these brands don't even think about who they're hiring or which they just, they have their relationships. But I think they need to make deliberate, conscious effort to invite Black businesses into their organization as vendors, because you're going to be helping the Black community at large by doing that. So I would say those are all sort of short-term things. I would lean more into that. Quite frankly, I think, this is actually only 2-3 weeks old, this whole scenario. We're talking about 400 years of oppression that we have to sort of unpack and understand. And I think that what's happening now is, it's still early days. It's super early days. I think we're going to see a lot more, people get frustrated. I think you're going to see a lot more brands could try to do the right thing and make mistakes. I think you're going to see a lot more tone deafness that will continue to come out because it's part of the process. But in doing that, if people, communities at large, generally try to support Black businesses around them, I think that's a great place to start. And that can be at the business level, but it can also be at the personal level. Does that help? And there'll be tons of others, but hopefully that sort of helps give a sense of the direction they can take.
So supporting Black communities and Black companies as well, I think that's a fantastic starting point for everyone around the world as well. This isn't just if you're based in the US or different parts of the world. So that's a really good implementation from the ground level. And we've got another question from Rachel, which is, hi, Danny, I'm a primary school teacher and have worked in really diverse school settings internationally. How do you feel like the role of teachers can help shape change in the next decade?
Oh my God, that's a great question. And thank you for that question. I think, so I have 2 young Black children who live out here with me in the US. And I often have this conversation about, the role that teachers will have. I actually think teachers are the front lines for curbing institutional racism, because teachers have the tools of education. I think the curriculums need to be a lot stronger. I think that teachers need to understand that teaching the history the correct way will ultimately benefit us as a human race. I would love to see a lot more conscious, deliberate teaching around some of the histories, American history in particular. I asked my kids' school, Black History Month, what are you doing? They had 1 book in the library. That's an example. And it's no fault. It's not because they don't necessarily want to teach it. It's not built into the curriculum. They're not incentivized to do it. So I think that you want to, as a teacher, every aspect of sort of the education process, you have an opportunity to interject new information, new context, and actually challenge some of this, because racism starts in the home. A lot of the stuff that we sort of deal with, it's our grandparents and bigotry and round Christmas table and, and the grumpy granddad that's sitting in the corner, like, rattling off all this negative energy. So teachers have the ability to rebut that. And so I think the role of teachers, in particular primary school, is huge, because they can really help set the foundation and give context to kids at a really early age before it becomes an issue, before they get older and sort of somewhat get indoctrinated by this mindset. So I salute you. I will say this. Thank you very much for what you do. I think teachers are amazing. You should be paid a lot more than you are. The role that you play in society, I think, is underrated. And moving forward, we all have a duty to help make sure that teachers are held up to the standard to which, they should be held up in society, because I really see them as the front line to curbing institutional and systematic racism.
And we only have you for 2 more minutes, so I'm going to see if we've got any more questions. But what you've just summarized there, it really goes back to something that you said at the beginning of this show, which really stood out for me, was that in your career journey, one of the hardest parts of breaking down this barrier was actually convincing yourself that you could do it. So
Right.
that comes from the educational system and maybe a lack of Black mentorship when you were growing up.
100%. I mean, yes is the answer to the question. There wasn't a lot of, I got a lot of my teachings from, I grew up in a single parent household with just my mom and my brother and my sisters. And music was a huge influence on me. To a large extent, music sort of guided me through some of the things that I was having to work through as a young up and coming, entrepreneur, designer, creator, whatever you wanted to call it at the time. And I think that moving forward, that's why I'm big on mentoring. I mentor a lot of kids right now, and I do it because I think it's important. I always ask myself the question, gosh, if I had that mentoring early, maybe I would have been a VP much earlier. I mean, I got there still, record breaking time. But how much further, what were the other opportunities that may have presented themselves had I had a mentor? Had I had someone around me that could, help me, don't go left, go right, hey, how about you look at these situations in these different ways? I was lucky. I was also a studious child. I naturally like studying. So thankfully for me, it was easy to sort of stay in the education system and continue to grow. I also didn't like crime. I didn't want to be, the stereotypical cliched character of a Black man that's out doing all sorts of bad things. I'm too lazy. That was never my thing. However, I loved art. I loved design. I loved music, and I loved being creative. And so I threw myself 1,000% into it. At times when there was temptations around me, friends of mine buying cars at the age of 18, I'm like, gosh, I'd like to have one of those. But realizing that the investment in my education in the long term was going to serve me better than these temporary, satisfactory things, material things that were sort of presenting themselves around me. And so for me, education, and mentorship. Surround yourself with good people that are smart, that uplift you, that inspire you, that push you. Because if you seek the moon, you'll touch a cloud, right? That's that saying of if you push yourself long enough, hard enough, you'll get some way to your goals. And so I'm a huge believer of mentorship. I'm a huge believer of education. I'm a huge believer of allowing people the space and freedom and building confidence early on in young Black children, because that's a huge, huge hindrance. The lack of belief, which comes from systematic, small, death by a thousand cuts racism. And so the confidence of the young Black communities, I think, is very important, in particular young Black women who've never had a voice. Not really. They've never really had a seat at the table. And so I'm particularly excited for that, because again, in that community, if it wasn't for Black women, the Black Lives Movement wouldn't be where it is today. I mean, that's just one example. And so, yeah, I think there's a wealth of knowledge and insight around you. I think people should seek it. I think that for those of us that have the ability and the means, we should help. We should mentor and teach and pay forward the information. And so for me, my time is now speaking to as many young people as I can to help them navigate the murky waters of corporate America, in the hope that it will help them, as they slowly develop. And I hope at the time my kids are my age, that, they're having a different conversation about race, that we're having a different conversations about the challenges of race, because we've hopefully solved some of those racial issues, which can be solved. It can be solved. It's people wanting to, and then it's discipline and consistency. Transparency has to be your friend. I think is oftentimes people talk about, I found it funny when I put the Medium article out, people are like, oh my God, you're a hero. And I said, you realize how weird it is that you're telling me I'm a hero for telling the truth? Like that itself should give you a sense of where we are as a society, when, you give me, people are literally telling me, wow, it's amazing, you're courageous. It's like, it's really not that courageous if it's truthful. I'm just literally sharing with you the experiences I had. But, and if that's going to help others, that's fantastic. But I think we as a society have to start getting comfortable with the subject, and we have to have these uncomfortable conversations, and we have to understand that we're all equal. You know, the notion of race and social hierarchy is all man-made. It's all made. We as a human race have created that. You know, no one's born racist. No one's born racist. Absolutely not. We're taught it. It's a systematic education of race. That's where we are today. And so I think anything that's been built by man can be brought down by man. So it's now about the will and the motivation to change. And I think I'm personally, I feel with a lot of positivity about where we're going. I've had, you know, some of my favorite heroes have been young teenage white girls that have done incredibly brave things, you know, and I'm looking at them thinking, wow, you're my hero. What you're doing and the way that you're applying yourself, you can tell it's touched them, you know, and I think that generation are going to surprise us all. I'm excited to see that. I feel positive that the world is in good hands with that group.
And I can really feel that positivity through you. And I know that's all that you have time for today. But Danny, I really want to sincerely thank you for today, for the conversation. I've listened, I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers have as well. So I'm just thank you on behalf of them as well. Thank you so much for your time today for Breaking Talks, Voices of the Diaspora. It was amazing to have you on the show today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I apologize for the next time. I'll make sure I have a better backdrop.
No worries at all. No, thank you so much. It was just such a pleasure.
Thank you. Speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so we had the amazing talk by Danny there, and I do want to go over to Janet, who's been our live in-house artist throughout this whole conversation. So we checked in with Janet around an hour ago, and we can see her art is still going on. And we also have Michelle that's joining us now from New York. Hi, Michelle, how are you? Oh, you're still mute. It should be the button on the homepage of Zoom. There we go. Hi, Michelle. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great to have you. So maybe just to start, if you want to give a little bit of an introduction to our audience and to our viewers, just a few short words on what you do and what's bringing you to the conversation today.
Yeah, so I work in tech. I have it's interesting, I've been in tech probably for, I don't know, maybe the last 15 years. Stumbled into it, had intention, and actually been working remotely for a long time. So in the whole COVID, world of COVID, if we want to call it that, it's been interesting because I was coming in a stage in my life where I was going to embark on the world and break away from being quarantined, if you will, because I've been working remotely. And then that stopped, and so I've seen that whole transition. And then, you know, I don't know much more I can obviously add to any current event conversation. I will say I'm a mother of an 18-year-old, and I've recently empty nested. I've worked from home. I've juggled that. He had a Hollywood career. I am half Asian. I'm Korean and white. I've grown up both in Korea and the US, and I've had to juggle those identities and those worlds, and practically all over the US. And so coming into a new world has been an interesting, and then of course in the heart of it all, New York City, you know, I'm having meetings and I'm like, excuse me, hold on one second, let me mute because I've got protests going down the street, which I would rather be at, but have to work. And so fine, but you know, I'm like, excuse me, I need to take this for a second. I have to let the traffic pass. But no, time for sure. Excuse me. And that's, I think, the brief intro or the long intro.
Fantastic. Well, you've given us a lot to talk about there as well. And I think it's great to have you on the show. So today's topic is collateral damage, voices of diaspora, as a woman in tech that is half Korean, as you said, and now living in New York, which is a very diverse place. How has the past few months for you been? We've seen, obviously, the COVID pandemic, which has kind of rattled and disrupted a lot of industries, tech including. And then we've also seen the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests, as you've mentioned. Your emotional interpretation of what you've seen, could you share that with the viewers?
My emotional interpretation has been a lot. You know, I like to consider myself a very, very practical, logical person. And there are times when you get very consumed with everything that's going on. When we went into quarantine, I actually was on my way back from Vietnam. I traveled all the time. And although I say I worked remotely, I do travel a lot for work, but when I'm not traveling, I work from home. Anyway, I came back to a city that is always thriving, always hustling and bustling, and you're shoulder to shoulder with people all the time, to empty. All of a sudden you could hear a pin drop, and it's been like that for months. I won't lie, I do like to ride my bike, so maybe I'm out more than I should be. But I've seen the city go through different stages. Definitely people run out when the sun wants to be out. Industries are gone. The bodegas are running. The only people you see on bikes are your delivery guys. And a city never, ever would have thought, I don't want to say shut down, but we shut down. It was a city that never slept. And 7 p.m. came around and you would realize everybody was still alive because we would cheer. But no, it became a very quiet place. And yes, it picked back up for the protests. And I was like, look, we're here. We're all here, accounted for, kind of. And then that was very emotional. And being on a block where you see, it wasn't just being watched through the news anymore. And again, it's happening in the streets of New York City. So New York City, as any city did, and you saw this, the boards are going up. And again, establishments like Macy's that take up all of 34th Street, if you've ever been, or, completely boarded. And this is, again, you're just thinking this is New York City. This is like The Walking Dead, and I don't even think I've seen a full episode. But if that's what I would envision it to be.
We have a lot of people, sorry, just to interrupt there. We have a lot of people that are watching from all over the world. So I'm based in Europe, and some of what we have seen from the protests that have been portrayed on the media, would they have been accurate, you think, when it comes to the atmosphere on the protests, as someone that lives local to the area and that can watch them from the windows?
I can say the daytime protests were all of the power and emotion and, the hope you would want. I was brought to tears. I could cry now because I'm watching my son march, in a sense. I'm watching these young, and I know, it's hard to imagine I have an 18-year-old, but I'm watching, it's his generation that are marching for change. And you just see this hope, and it's just so impactful. Then you have the night, and it changes at night. And I was lucky that I happened to stay that specific night in Queens, but my boyfriend stayed behind in his apartment where, again, I could hear the daytime protests, excuse me. But when the looting happened at night, he's like, this is the first time I have ever been so scared. I wasn't there for that. But when he went to walk his dog, it's like black Cadillacs are rolling up and everyone is in SWAT gear and the windows are just rolled down and they're making eye contact and they're announcing, and he was like, it was really out of a movie. He never felt, and he's a big guy, he's like, I've never been afraid like that. And he's also a nurse. So he's working on the COVID unit. So it's going to take a lot for him to tell you he was actually really afraid. So and then the next day, I didn't mean to make jokes, but he said there were lighters all over. And I was like, did you get enough, in case we run out? He's like, I don't think you get how scary it was. He was like, I honestly thought my car was going to catch fire. So it was intense. It was really, really, but I mean, that's New York City. I know that it's very intense other places. I mean, extremely intense.
And you've mentioned your son there and the next generation of what we're seeing, and something really interesting throughout this 2-hour live stream is that we've had everyone that's come on is a parent, and everyone that's come on is saying that this is really important to discuss for the next generation and implementing things moving forward. So what kind of educational life lessons are you passing on to your child at this time?
Oh gosh. A big one is please just, read the news, just don't read the headlines. And once you read that article, make sure there's another article that you read that backs that one up. And coming from a city that's as urban as we are, it's hard we have a very diverse group, right? And my son actually has a team that surrounds him, and all of his designers, speaking of Danny, not brand designers, but clothing designers, they're all Black. And my best, so we have seen that community come up and thrive during all of it. But I just feel like, that generation and, him and teaching them. It's like, I don't know. I hate when people say I don't see color. So I don't want to say that, but trying to be inclusive. And it's hard not to when you live in a city like New York, and we lived at that time in Brooklyn. But, when we would go home, we're from Colorado, he would see the difference, he would see the changes, and he would appreciate the diversity in his life. And, I had to grow up reconciling two identities, a white one and an ethnic one. And so I don't know how to communicate it so well, but you understand those struggles. And so you try to raise your children to have a perspective of everyone is an individual, and your interaction with the world should be based on your interaction with that person. Because everyone has their own story, has their own struggle. You could be from any walk of life, and you just can't. You have to. And I'm very much an in the moment person too. So live the experience with that person and be in that moment with that person. Because again, who that person was 10 years ago isn't who they want to be tomorrow. And so you have to meet people where they want to meet you and where they are.
Mm-hmm. That was beautifully put. You've summarized it wonderfully, and I couldn't agree more with you. So something throughout today's show that we have seen is all the conversations have had a slight business approach when it comes to corporate America, when it comes to Rod, who was on the show earlier, and investments in Puerto Rico. When it comes to diaspora communities in the tech space, you're based in New York, when it comes to the tech space coming up there, is that somewhere that you identify it could have more of a alliance with diaspora communities? Is it something that is underachieving, in your opinion, in the tech space, or do you think it's fulfilling quite a strong need?
Well, I know my own struggles to get more women in tech, right? So tell you, I know it sounds silly, but I always try to wear a dress every day, just if the woman is in the room, like without doubting, if you look under the table. Not that it takes a dress, but you know what I mean. So I want to bring more women into the space. I would even say, for me, I feel like it's a very diverse space from a race perspective, and even from a global perspective. I am lucky that tech offers the opportunity to work globally, which I love. And so in some way, the world is a small world for me. like yesterday, I'm on the phone with someone in India, and the other day I was in, on a call with someone in Toronto. So I'm working all over, which I love. I do see more and more women coming into the space because I've been here now for a while. But to be specific, around the Black Lives Matter movement, no, there could definitely be more, and definitely, and to Danny's point, and anytime we do talk about this, and I don't want to get political, but I do think that the Black woman is underrepresented to a disgusting degree. You don't hear about the things that happen to them the same way you hear about it happening to Black men. And and usually when you do, it's always, in a different light, and in a way I don't think it's fair, and I don't think it's about being fair, but it's just very stereotypical, and I don't think that's the way that we should be treating women in general, and Black women specifically. So I would like to see more Black women in the space. And if you want,
you had any,
I will tell you, I am, if anyone knows me, everyone is my friend, my best friend I met in an Uber ride. I talk to everyone I encounter. And every Black woman I meet that says they have any interest in tech, because I talk to everyone on the subway or an Uber ride, I'm like, call me and I will see what I can do for you. And so I do try to bring people on board every opportunity I get, or even consult, consulting. But there are some amazing women in the space too. And I think if you look to Patreon, I think you will see a very beautiful Black, strong woman in that space. And actually, I remember when she interviewed me, how intimidated I was. I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like a but no, I think you have all of your leaders in that space are always amazing women, but I definitely think that, yes, there can be more. And I don't mean just like a few, definitely more, a lot more.
A higher percentage point, absolutely.
Yeah.
On a final point then, so you kind of mentioned like from a political perspective and this requirement to see more kind of powerful women in the space. And something that I kind of acknowledged to someone that's based in Europe that was kind of watching the news, and I'm tactfully trying to think how to phrase this. What did we see from the US president when he came to referring to coronavirus as the Chinese virus or the virus from China? With New York being such a diverse place, what kind of sentiment did you find that put on the ground in New York City and even across America, but for people that are residing there, that are working there, that are of Asian heritage?
Yes. Funny. That's in the same way maybe you didn't know how to ask it, I don't know how to answer it. So personal experience and a New York City experience. New York City, you could see the hit Chinatown took. You know, I don't know that K-Town took such a hit because I was around and, you know, I had to grocery shop. So I different vibe. And it also has a lot of standard hotels and it's right by Penn Station. So, I mean, it felt, I think, the same impact a lot of the city did, but you could definitely see, even before we were deeming COVID what it was, you know, Chinatown was taking the hit in New York City. And then as far as even a personal experience, you know, I was, I think, on the plane. I was on the plane traveling for work and allergies or something. I had a sneeze or something. And, you know, the entire plane ride, we were doing fine. It was me. And then I was in the window and there was an aisle seat and then a gentleman to my right. And, excuse me, I was in the window. He was in the aisle. And I sneezed and it kind of was a little fit. And he took one look at me and he immediately brought out his wipes and started wiping everything down and then put on his mask. And I won't lie, some of me was like, you were fine the entire time, you know? And then you had to like actually look to see who was sneezing. And then once you kind of registered that I was Asian, maybe, you know, the reaction changed. And I don't know, maybe it was just a precaution too. But when you knew that that was what was floating around, you kind of felt.
You felt it.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much for summarizing that, because I think it's fantastic to get your experience and to get how everything is coming across. So thank you so much. I'd love for you to stay on the line now, and we are going to go over to Janet, and I'd love to get your impressions on this as well. So Janet, for the past 2 hours, has been working on this amazing freedom piece as part of the Break and Talk special. So Janet, can you hear us? How's the art looking? Can she hear us?
Maybe
I think.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hi,
Yeah.
Janet. How's it going?
Fine, thank you.
It looks amazing. So this is something where, can you just talk us through it for people that have just joined out for this segment now? What have you been working on?
Oh, this one? Yes.
Yeah.
When I paint this painting, I feel, that's what I, shared before. The strength and power, and then on courage. We have to encourage each other, and we have to give strength to each other and unity together. So, this one is a lion and lioness. It represents like a husband and wife and families and friends and community. So that's what I'm doing.
It's really beautiful. And can you talk us through some of the techniques that you've used as well? The colors are amazing. The eyes on the lion look very powerful, very kind of courageous. So just some of the art techniques that you've used throughout this painting.
Oh, the techniques? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can tell the free technique. That's like free. I just use the brush and some knives. And kind of a big brush too. So I just, I didn't have any limitation to how to use a brush and, knife. I just follow my heart and follow my inspiration. So just do it. That's my technique.
It's amazing. So for anyone that is watching that is wondering the inspiration for this piece, so Janet has been listening to our 2 hours of discussion, the first hour with Rod Miller, where we talked about the diaspora voice and in Puerto Rico and how things have been looking in Puerto Rico from a government perspective. And then the second hour, we had Danny, who was the former vice president branding at Nike. So throughout these conversations, whether it's the diaspora voice in Puerto Rico from investments or also from corporate America, this collateral damage that we have seen is fully portrayed in this art. So it looks fantastic. And I would recommend anyone that does have any more questions to go on to Give On Live's Twitter or Facebook page, because I'm under the impression that this might be auctioned off. So I would advise you to go over, follow us on Facebook, like the Twitter page, just to check and subscribe to our YouTube as well. But I think that's all that we have time for today. It's been a fantastic discussion. So thank you so much, Janet, for joining us. Michelle, thank you so much for tuning in as well. We've had some great guests. And for everyone that's tuned in and asked us questions as well, thank you for all of your participation for Breaking Talks. We've really valued everyone's time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
아니 있어요? 언니?
오케이.
잘했어요.
잘했어?
네네네. 잘했어요. 네.
저기 이뻐? 야, you know, can you 이거 저기 그 레코드 한 거 자기가 can you send me a recording? 이거 한 거? 그림?
뭘?
그림 레코드 한 거 있잖아. 그림 레코드 한 거 나한테 파일 보내줄 수 있어?
네네네네. 근데 저기도 잠깐만요. 저기도 그 우리 스타일 가이드 만약에 우리 먼저 에디팅 할 거예요. 에디팅
할 거야? 오케이. 그럼 에디팅하고 보내줘. 에디팅하고 내가 내 거 카메라 썼는데 별로 안 좋아. 이게 보니까 라이트이 니네 게 훨씬 더 브라이트하고 좋아 보니까.
네네. 네네. 그냥 보낼게요. 그러면 그냥
full process.
저도 저기 비디오 보낼게요. 근데 later the full episode, edited episode